This is the Authentic Change Podcast, and I am Mike Horne. Authenticity reflects what we want from each other and our organizations: open communication, trust, community, fun, and opportunity. I want to help you to do your best in your personal and professional relationships. This podcast delivers expertise, insights, and approaches on authentic leadership, to live your purpose, to lead from your values, to establish connected relationships, to steward people and culture change, to build and sustain prosperity, and to open doors and possibilities. This podcast will assist you in paving the way forward to personal, team, and organizational prosperity. Welcome to the Authentic Change Podcast with Mike Horne. I am absolutely delighted today to welcome as our guest, Greg Roworth. That is Roworth, just so I have the pronunciation correct. Greg Roworth. I am so delighted to have Greg as a guest. Greg has been dubbed as Australia's #1 business growth strategist for owners of professional service firms and is the author of Run Your Business on Autopilot: How to Leverage Your Business for Maximum Profit in Minimum Time, and Cracking the Code: How to Break Free from Being Stuck in the Center of Your Business to Growing Your Business at the Strategic Level. Greg has helped countless people, and he really specializes in assisting smart but frustrated professional business owners to discover their unique market positioning and to quickly leverage their business by attracting more ideal clients and building the systems to run their businesses on autopilot. I know that this topic will be of interest to so many of our listeners, particularly as we think about professional services firms, we think about authenticity and integrity. And with that, I'd just like to welcome Greg again. And Greg, would you say a few words to our listeners about yourself?
Oh, well, thanks, Mike. That's a great introduction. Definitely when I look back over the years and think, wow, that's what I've done. I think, I don't know how I've quite made those achievements, or, is that me he's talking about? But I know that it hasn't all been easy. You get the highlights in these sort of introductions and, all the good points, but it wasn't always that easy, and it was quite a struggle along the way for me to achieve success in my own businesses. And
Greg's had, just so our audience knows, Greg has grown and sold 5 businesses of his own, as well as, having worked helping hundreds of small business owners. I'm sorry, Greg, but I thought our audience should know that as well.
That's right. Yes. Yeah. No, it's, I think they call me a serial entrepreneur. But it's one of those things in the blood. I don't think I'm really employable these days. I always have my own ideas about how to do things. Not that I can't work with other people, because that's been an important part of the journey as well. But, I just love to make my own way, I guess.
Greg, what's been the drive to form and grow and then divest 5 businesses? What's been the drive?
Yeah, good question. My passion about helping professional service firms particularly, I think, comes back to one incident when I was running my first business. And it was 4 years into the business, and I'd grown the business. I had 9 employees working for me, and we actually had a record year's sales, but I was working 70-hour weeks and cash flow was diabolical. And I went to my accountant for help, and he crunched the numbers and got the report back, and he said to me, Greg, you've had a record year's sales, but you've also had a record loss. And I said to him, wow, okay, well, what do I do about it? And all he could give me was theory. And really wasn't able to help me in any practical sense. So I went out looking for help and managed to find some people who mentored me and gave me some assistance. And I got the business back on track. Eventually, I turned it around and was quite successful in that business. And I had people noticing my success and coming to me, asking me for assistance, which I couldn't quite believe. It was such a turnaround. So, I decided I might get into consulting and start to see what I could do to help other people. But it was that experience of really struggling in my own business and not really being able to get the assistance that I needed in a practical way to grow my business. And these days there are lots of business coaches around. Back in those days, I don't think the word business coach was invented. It's going back probably 30 years. But now there are a lot of so-called business coaches around. But I've also seen and been involved in the business coaching consulting world for 30 years, and seeing that a lot of those people themselves, whether they're accountants or advisors, they also struggle to grow their own business. And one of the biggest challenges is, how do they get their ideal clients? So on one hand, you've got people desperate for help. On the other hand, you've got professionals with experience, with an ability, but not able to find the people they can help. So, my passion has been, after growing those business and being able to help my clients, since I sold my last business, really, looking at, well, how can I put my experience together so that I can support the people who are able to help the people who need the help, and really help them so they can have maximum impact on their clients, so that they can really do good in the world and have the whole ecology working in a much more systematic and effective and efficient way.
That's so amazing, Greg. I mean, just so our audience knows, when you speak about professional services firms, or when we discuss professional services firms, I'm thinking back to the professional services firms that I've worked for. I'm thinking about consulting firms, accountancies, solicitors, lawyers. Is that the right way to think about professional services?
That's right. Yeah, absolutely. All of those people providing support and advice to people in that professional capacity, where they deal with clients, and usually in that sort of a practice or firm, they have clients over a long period of time. Most clients of a legal firm or an accounting firm stay with them for quite a long time. So it's really about having a long-term relationship with your clients, so that you can assist them and have maximum impact on their own business or even their lives.
And what do you find in the coaching that you do today to help these professional services firms? Do you find the same sort of loyalty that plays through? Or sometimes I don't think it's loyalty. I mean, I think that sometimes it's the cost of the trade-off, which makes it difficult to switch professional services firms.
Yeah, sometimes that's the case. And I think, particularly with accounting firms, and I've been an accountant, qualified accountant. That's where I came from. People stay with their accountant often because they don't know any better, and the accountant does the job that they signed up for, but there's really so much more than an accountant typically can give to their clients if they were a bit more proactive. But accountants tend to be fairly systematic and steady in their approach. They're very conscientious people and do good work in the areas they know. And most of that's around crunching the numbers, doing the financial reports, the taxation work, and staying within their lane. They're very good. They're often reluctant to move outside of those lanes, but they could if they were, if they really had their focus on what does their client need. What else could I support my clients with? So it's not even about them looking at how can I make more money. It's about, well, how can I give my clients more support in a way that's helpful to them? And if that's their approach, most clients are really open to finding out how they can do better. But I think often and whether it's an accountant, a lawyer, or a consultant, they're often reluctant to sell. That's not really what they signed up for. They have their specialisation in their technical or professional craft. They're not salespeople, so they often don't look for other opportunities to support their clients. So what I do really is try to join the dots for the professional, so that they can see it's about how can you provide a greater level of support and assistance to the clients that you already have a relationship with. They already have a level of trust with you, and need more help that you can provide.
My sense is that you have tremendous accountability for helping people to progress. And I think personal accountability is certainly one of the things we know about people who lead with integrity. They have a deep sense of personal accountability. Once they take things on, they like to see their successes and their clients succeed, and to collaborate with those around them. And I wonder, in that sense of accountability that you bring to help your clients find greater value in their businesses, given that trust already exists in many of these relationships, do you ever find times or situations where the professional services firm's lack of accountability to make progress in areas that are uncomfortable? How would you think about that, or how do you talk about that?
Yeah, that's a great point. I think, there is a level of accountability, and I think a well-known man called Jay Abraham talked about a fiduciary duty that professionals have to their clients. And when you look at it in those terms, it's really about the professional investing themselves in the best results and the best outcomes for their clients. But I think that lack of accountability often applies in situations where, as long as they do their job, that's enough. And I think that's the shortfall I see in the professions. They're very good at doing what they're asked to do and what they're contracted to do, but they often don't think about what's really in the best interest of their clients, and what else could they do to support them in more impactful ways.
Greg, let us in on the secrets, or in on your wisdom. What are some of the ways in which you bring your best to every one of these client situations?
I think probably one of the ways one of my favorite sayings is that for the professional, they want to present themselves and be seen as the savior, not the servant. And I think a lot of professionals, service is part of what they do. They see themselves as servants, and they're often put in a situation by clients with a lot of power and, with money, that the client will ask them to do certain things. And, that's fine. That's exactly what they're in business for. They're there to serve. They're there to do what the clients want them to do. But what I often find is that because they're the professional, they actually know more than the clients. So if they're just limited to doing what the clients ask them to do, there's often a gap between what they are doing and what they could be doing that would have a greater impact. It's much like a doctor, and I think using a doctor as the example is often very beneficial, because if we went into a doctor and said, Doc, I've got headaches, I've been getting headaches regularly, but I think you just need to give me some headache tablets and I should be okay. Can you just write out a prescription for something a bit stronger than what I can get over the counter? If the doctor did that, they'd be sued for malpractice pretty soon, I'm sure. But that's what professionals do a lot. That they'll go into a client. The client will say, "Now here's what we want you to do for us. Can you give us a proposal?" And, we'll look at your proposal and 2 or 3 others and decide who we want to do the work for us. So the professionals go away and write up proposals and, send in their proposal to do what the client's asked. What I would rather see them doing is say, well, take a step back. Before we agree to present that proposal, let's do a bit more of a diagnosis and really examine if we can see that there's something else that's underlying the problem you want solved, and whether we can solve that in a different or better way. And let's present our proposal based on that. And even when they're in an engagement, to go beyond the scope of that engagement, not without getting paid, but to look beyond the scope and say, well, we're doing this now, but what else is it that our client needs that we should point out to them and provide a level of service? So, being the savior is about, really having the client's best interests at heart and looking at how you can serve them in a much greater way than what you're being asked to do.
In a way, it's all about the creation of additional value, and to do that
Absolutely.
early.
Yeah.
And Greg, what I wonder, when we speak about authenticity, we speak about alignment, that words and actions match, and even better, that words, actions, and ways of thinking, right? Attitudes, behaviors, cognitions, all line up. What do you think some of the gaps are? What have you seen as the gaps in closing this, the belief between what I know I need to do in order to serve my clients and actually doing it?
I think it comes down to, what are we in business for? As a professional, we often, get into a profession because we, think it might be a nice job to do. We enjoy helping people and we've got some skills in a certain area. So for me, it was as an accountant. I went to, university, got a degree in accounting, went to work as an accountant. So you tend to have a profession that's about the job and, and about what you're getting paid. And most professionals, are paid reasonably well, above average incomes for most people. So they're attractive opportunities for people to go into professions and earn good money. But I think if that's the only reason that we're in business and in our profession, then we're actually losing sight of why that profession came into being in the first place. And those professions existed because they had value to offer. They had an important place in impacting the lives of their clients. So, if our focus is on what's in it for us and what we can get out of it, we tend to not really provide a high level of value to our clients. But if we can look back and say, well, why am I really doing this beyond what's in it for me? What's in it for the client, and how can I best serve my clients and provide value for my clients, and discover a vision that's inspiring you to get out of bed in the morning and go to work to do the job, even if you didn't get paid for it, and get the fulfillment of working for a client that you're adding value to, impacting in a positive way, and really seeing that client better off for you being there.
Greg, that's fascinating. And in some ways, it sounds so easy, and yet we know how difficult it is. And perhaps this is why we sometimes sometimes hear or we know about these gaps of integrity or ethics. And, they come up often in the financial services industry. And I wonder what it is. I'm sure there is no generalized statement that accounts for these lapses. I think about Wells Fargo in the U.S. and the financial disasters there. I mean, integrity was a value there. If you go back to the classic business school case in the U.S. around Enron, it was the number one value there. But something didn't work out, right? We had these ideas on the walls, but not in the halls. How do you, as you're working with professional services providers, many of whom, at some points, just like your first experience where you said you made a good, you produced revenue, but there was still a big loss. It might be easy for some people to say, well, let me cut corners. And this is why I think your ideas around accountability come into focus. How else would you think about that or comment about that or help our audience to relate to that?
Yeah, it's a great question. And, definitely one of the things I see and talk about a lot is, having a mission statement that doesn't just sit on the wall in the foyer of the office building and, and no one takes notice of it, or, people just pay lip service to it. I think, that is the difference between the Enrons and the Wells Fargo examples that, in the corporate think tank sessions, where they have to come up with these great statements, they understand what it looks like, but then they don't live it. And I think, where integrity comes into play is that vision and mission, which need to be aligned, have to be the driving force in why you're going to work. Simon Sinek talks about, start with why. A great TED talk, if you haven't seen that. I think everyone should watch that, or read his book. But, really starting with a why, that is your driving passion, that drives you when it's about contribution, when it's about the value that you add to your clients. And, integrity has to be a basic, fundamental way that we operate in business, and particularly in professional services. If you can't operate with integrity, you're really, going to be in trouble before very long. So, really, having that alignment between the vision and the mission, and being inspired to get up and do your work based around that contribution is the most important thing that I see.
Yeah, and certainly making these values real. If it's the value of integrity, people also talk about passion. They talk about courage. In your experience, Greg, in guiding so many entrepreneurs to their prosperity, are there certain values that you've observed that are indicative of these leaders or these organizations or these teams?
It's values is such an important part of doing business as well, and they flow, down from vision and mission, and values have to come next. But studies have shown that it doesn't really matter what the values are. Successful businesses have values that everyone knows and lives by, but the values can be different from one business to another. The important thing is to have values, but it's not so important what those values are. But as long as people are living and breathing the values and they're in alignment and in integrity, then that seems to work. So, I'm not sure I've fully answered your question there.
Oh, you have. I mean, it may, or maybe we've scratched the surface of it, but certainly I think your point that values do shape behaviors in organizations. I think about one client I worked with, and it was a startup, and they had a value of frugality. And it drove a lot of different behavior in that organization, and it drove a lot of their success as well. And I've also worked with an organization where a value was straight talk or candor, and that didn't help them in a lot of ways. So it's just so interesting to know that these values are selective in what we choose. And in professional services, I mean, certainly you're right. I mean, having worked in at least one or two big professional services firms, I know that integrity is fundamental to your product. It's fundamental to your service. It's the surest way to lose a client when, and I wonder about the other values that underlie our success in professional services. We've talked about a value for service over self-interest, or understanding self-interest and service and how they relate. I wonder if there are one or two other values that you might describe to those seeking to improve their professional services business as great flight paths or guideways to prosperity.
Yeah, Well, I think that self-interest that you mentioned is the biggest undermining factor, and in the trust equation that it's the denominator that defines success or failure. And it's if there's a high level of self-interest, then it undermines integrity and undermines trust. It undermines success. So I think the values really come about through a lack of self-interest, which is really difficult because everyone has self-interest. We have to provide for ourselves. We have to survive ourselves. So our self-interest is predominant in our lives. But it's like when you're on the airplane when you are taking off. It's a long time since I've been able to do that now.
For many of us.
Couple of years, but I remember that the instructions were when the mask comes down, the oxygen mask, you put it on yourself first before you're helping other people. So we have to look after ourselves first, but then it goes beyond. Well, how do we support other people? And I think it's very difficult to eliminate self-interest, but if you're a parent. If you have children, you know how you're driven to love your children and to give to them first. So, when your child needs you, your self-interest goes out the window. So, having values around, all the good things you can do, I think will never override self-interest. But if you have a value or a vision rather, that drives you and inspires you so that you almost look at your clients like your children. You love your clients. You've got to be driven by your love for your clients. When you're driven by love for your clients, your self-interest goes out the window. So it's just about, the same as treating, how do you look after your children? You provide your children with what they need. And it really, you don't have to think about what values you're operating around. It's about what, how do you love your children, or how do you love your clients as much as you can?
And maybe it goes back to this other topic around honesty and trust related to integrity. And you're such a great commentator for our audience on these topics. And, sometimes people ask me in the context of authentic leadership and trust in groups, is it okay to tell a lie? And I go, well, why are you asking me that question? But what I have observed, because I can't answer that for someone, what I have observed is that when people tell lies, it's difficult to create trust in a group. Difficult to create trust in your team. It's difficult to create trust with another individual. And that just shortchanges our acceleration, our time to value in terms of innovation, in terms of building authentic leadership, which results in innovation and other great things. So those, thinking about these topics that you've raised for us around values and honesty and integrity and choosing understanding self-interest and service. Greg, are there any, just as we begin to wrap up our discussions and our broadcast today, what are some of the barriers that people need to break through when they're encountering difficulties in these areas, or how might they explore them, or what recommendations or advice would you provide?
I think there are a lot of barriers when it comes to dealing with people, and whether they're dealing with clients or dealing with employees. We have differences of opinion, different goals, different ambitions. So it's that self-interest factor there is always in play. So to me it comes down to what is integrity. Do what you say and say what you do. That is the first fundamental. And with authenticity, how do I think particularly in the corporate world, there's a pressure to put on a good face, to always show up looking like things are going well and that, you're bulletproof. Where
you don't know it, fake it.
That's right. And, I think, the best leaders have a way of being themselves, of being seen for who they are and not being ashamed or not being afraid to be who they are. And, to really be able to have that level of trust in your people, in your clients, that, they don't really want the fake. They don't want the false bravado. They'd rather know that you've struggled with things that they're struggling with, and you didn't have it easy. For me, that's always been a benefit to be able to tell my story of how I struggled, and to talk to people across the table and say, well, I know exactly how you feel. I've been there. I've had these struggles too, but the good thing is there is a way out. So, in those sort of situations, that you lead by understanding. I think people need to be or feel that they're understood before you try to get them to understand something. So showing people that you understand them first is a great way. That sounds like it's manipulative, and we're not, not wanting to manipulate people, but actually showing that you understand and wanting to understand people is where it all starts. If you can show them that you understand them and want to understand their situation, then you gain their trust.
Such a universal human need. Please understand me.
Yeah.
And just, Greg, you are the best to capture this. You are a gifted teacher and mentor and colleague to many. And if our audience wanted to get in touch with you, what are the ways that they could be in touch with you?
Well, my business website is businessflightpath.com. That's probably the best place to start, but also people can find me on LinkedIn. I'm quite active on LinkedIn. So just, do a search for Greg Roworth. There's not too many Greg Roworths around in the world, so you should find me easily enough. But yeah, I'd love to know that, if you've been on this podcast and want to know more, just, let me know. You can get in touch, download some of the free resources I have on my website, and, send me an email when you get my email address, or, through LinkedIn. Just connect with me on LinkedIn and let me know that you've heard me on Mike Horne's podcast.
Oh, that's great. And just once again, for everyone in our audience, I think Greg is right. You're not going to find, you won't find anyone like Greg Roworth in your field, because he is uniquely singular and uniquely qualified to offer experience and guidance and I guess the flight path for those who are seeking to grow and to develop, and particularly with their professional services business is. So once again, it's ROWORTH, Greg, GREG. And you can find him on LinkedIn and at his business address. Greg, it's just been such a delight for me, and I'm sure for our audience, to have you as a guest on Authentic Change. And I'd like to wish you continuing success, and hope that our audience members are able to get in touch with you for those who have needs in these areas. And again, Greg, thank you so much. Just a delight, and appreciate the generosity of your time and your passions.
No, thanks very much, Mike. It's been an absolute pleasure.
All right, everyone. Until the next episode of Authentic Change with Mike Horne, please go out and do your best. Thanks for listening, and I hope you'll subscribe today and tell a friend about our show. If you're looking for hands-on help to increase your success through authentic change, or have a question you'd like to hear me answer here, please email me at mike@mike-horne.com.